Another way in which you can get subsidence is through earthquakes. So when you have a fault that is locked, as you have seen in the earthquake chapter, right? And then there is uplift happening, and the I guess the plate that is on top of the subduction zone. Then when you have an earthquake, you're going to get those plates to shift. And due to the shifting, the plate that was on top of the subducted plate is now going to overall go up, but certain parts of it are going to sort of spread, as you're seeing in the diagram below. So because of that spreading, parts of it are going to go down a little bit within, like depth-wise. So you're going to get a little bit of subsidence further away from the trench, as you're seeing in the diagram. So an example is in Littleton Port in Christchurch in New Zealand. And that is also, again, a subduction zone. So this same mechanisms that you're seeing in the bottom diagram is what's happening there in New Zealand at the Littleton Port in Christchurch. Another way in which you can get subsidence, and this is from the underground draining of magma, is by basically collapsing the ground in which the magma used to run underneath. So I think we went over lava tubes a little bit when we talked about basaltic type of magma in the volcanoes lecture. So if you remember, lava tubes basically, because the viscosity of basaltic eruptions is fairly low, the flow is fairly high. So you can think of a lava tube of basically being formed. In fact, I'm going to draw it. Give me 1 second. So let's see. All right, so if this was your lava flowing throughout, so again, that's flowing pretty effusively, pretty nice, good, constant flow, fairly fast, not very viscous. The thing that's going to happen is that the bottom and the top are going to be the first parts to cool because they are in contact with the cooling surface, in which case it's going to be the ground on the bottom. Oh no. And the air at the top. So let's do that. So I'm going to draw these as the cooling surfaces on the bottom and the top. So this is going to be cooling and crystallizing more rapidly probably from the bottom, but also at the top. Okay. So you guys kind of get the idea. This is crystallizing into rock. The rest is still magma that is flowing throughout. So again, those two pieces crystallize. The rest of the magma continues to flow that way. And then eventually you're going to get this whole space in between to be pretty much empty. So you're going to get a lava tube. So this stuff is going to be empty. I'm not going to color it all, but you guys get the idea. And you get a bunch of just simple empty space. So with time and potentially some sort of like control of people stepping on top of the ground, or species just simply walking on top of the ground, or perhaps some movement, some seismic activity, this top part, maybe if I put the color differently, this top part may completely collapse. So this may actually fall down here. Basically, that's how that would happen. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay. Okay, another thing that can happen is that because when you have a magma eruption, a lava eruption, I should say, the magma will initially uplift the land because it's swelling upwards. So the volcano, near the volcano, all the magma is swelling upwards and is pushing the ground up. Once all that magma flows on top of the surface as lava, there's no longer anything inside that volcano, inside the chamber or inside the conduits through which the magma erupted. So all those conduits are now empty, and hence you can have collapse on those conduits as well. So hopefully that makes sense, but if not, definitely let me know. Another way in which you can get subsidence, and this one is very common nowadays, is going to be with the withdrawal of underground fluids. So by that we mean the basically drilling and extraction of groundwater that we have underneath. So before I can tell you how that's going to affect, I think we need to take a minute to go over groundwater real fast. So let's go over that real fast over here. So basically you're gonna have your soils. Let me draw just a few marks. So these are gonna be your soils. These, let's make them all, whatever, blue will do. I'm gonna make a layer here of clay soils. Over here they're gonna be sands. Let's make another layer of clay soils underneath over here. Alright. And assume that this is your surface, pretty much. Okay, and let's make a couple of wells. One over here and one over here. Okay, so these are going to be wells. Let's make the blue be sands. Sands. And let's make the greenish be clays. Alright. Alright, and we have some water, which the water will be this light colored blue, kind of going all throughout the sands. Okay, so sands are very impermeable, so the water, permeable, so the water will flow easily through the sands. Permeability is the easy flow of water through the different pores. So a place where you have groundwater flowing easily through the sands and in which you are not confining the water flow, or the aquifer it's called. So the place where the water is flowing through is going to be the aquifer. So aquifer. So again, where you don't have confinement of that aquifer on the top and the bottom, but maybe you just have it on the bottom, that's going to be an unconfined aquifer. So if we look at this whole diagram that I drew, I don't have confinement on the top on this well. So this would be an unconfined aquifer. So over here, although I have clays here at the bottom, those clays are not going to affect the water that is flowing through the sands. The water may potentially flow upwards or downwards up to here. So that's an unconfined. So unconfined. Okay, I'm not going to write it all confined. However, on this left-hand side, where I have confinement of the water that is flowing through the aquifer, I have confinement by the clay layers here at the top and also here at the bottom, then this part of the aquifer is going to be a confined aquifer. Okay? So why is it confined when the clays are on the top and the bottom? So if you think it's because the clays are very impermeable, that is exactly correct. So clays are going to be impermeable. They're not going to let much water flow through them. So if I try to flow through here, it's very unlikely that I can get through it. So I'm just going to continue this way because that's the easiest flow path. However, if my water again is flowing through here, there's nothing impeding me from going upwards that way. So just like in the surface, you know that water flows downhill, so this representation I made is kind of funny. But if you were to tip this whole thing, you know, a little bit, so if you were to make the surface now be like that, then that scenario that I drew is actually likely. So I could have, I could have this line that I made over here be, you know, going that way, basically. And that would work. So again, when you have confinement, it's going to be a confined aquifer. And when you don't, when the reservoir, when the aquifer itself is free, like the water within it is free to flow, that's going to be an unconfined aquifer. Okay? So now thinking again about our soils just being there. So these are our sands again, right? And these are going to be our clays, but that doesn't matter for now. Okay. And these are going to be the surface. There's a bunch of empty space within, like between each of these particles, right? So I'm going to draw empty space red. There's a bunch of empty space pretty much all throughout here. The empty space, provided there's water, is going to be filled with the water. So all of that is going to be water filled. That's where the groundwater is going to flow. So not too surprising. But if we were to drill into that area in our wells and extract that water, so now that water is going to go through our wells and upwards. Then I am going to have those places where the water was filling go back to being simply empty space. So if I leave that empty space as empty space long enough, meaning I don't have refilling of the reservoir of the aquifer with the water, then slowly this soil that is on top is going to slowly compact that empty space. And so you are going to get all of these, all of these sediments to be closer together and more compact. Now maybe the layer of clay will drop enough to be down here, and then our surface would drop enough to be perhaps over here. Okay? So hopefully that made sense. But basically, if you drop the groundwater level enough and keep it dropped for long enough, the overlying weight of those sediments is going to make everything go further in depth. It's going to make everything collapse on top of the empty space. So that is what has happened in the San Joaquin Valley in California. And so you can see in this picture, which is crazy, where the land level used to be in 1925. That area got occupied incredibly fast during the next like 60 or 70 years after 1920. And they used a lot of their groundwater. So there was continuous groundwater intake, or I should say drawing of that groundwater. And so you see as a representation here in the diagram that all of this groundwater was going into the wells and it was getting lower and lower and lower. And so they were draining their aquifer almost completely dry. So as they did that, again, all that empty space that used to be occupied by the groundwater but then wasn't, got filled in by the sediments that were overlying it. And so the land level fell and fell and fell. So you can see the land level in 1955 was easily like 8 feet below, and by 1963 was almost maybe 15 or 20 feet below what was in 1925. Luckily, since I think it was the 1960s or 1970s, they started trying to take steps towards remediation, and so you see that the land level has stayed pretty constant for the last 40 years now. But because the empty space was filled with the sediments, we are no longer able to simply, put water in the ground and make that expand. You cannot expand space that no longer is available. You can usually refill empty space with water, even if you draw it out, but if that space has now been filled with sediment, the water won't be able to simply get through that sediment and expand it back up. So that is one of the withdrawals of actually removing groundwater to such a high rate as they did in the San Joaquin Valley. So your lab actually is an exercise based on this. So you'll see a lot of graphs and useful information on it later.